Peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll. Whatever my lot thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul.
It was in Luke chapter 9, verse 51, where we read that Jesus set his face toward Jerusalem. And the chapters that are going to follow, Luke chapter 9, especially after verse 51, where we read, "And it came to pass, when the time was come that he should be received up, he steadfastly set his face to go to Jerusalem." It was in this time in which is going to follow that Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem. Previously in the book, or what's going to come in this book in just a little bit, in Luke chapter 11, we're going to see the prayer in which is going to be offered. But Jesus is going to point out the blindness, the spiritual blindness of the lawyers and the Pharisees in Luke 11, 33 through 36. In that particular chapter, Jesus has just demonstrated himself over the entire earth by casting out a demon in a particular individual. And he was asked by the lawyers and the Pharisees to perform another sign. He then contrasts them with Nineveh and the queen of the south in Luke chapter 9, verses 29 through 32, and pronounces typically what we would call a woe upon them, and 3 woes against the lawyers. He then addresses his disciples as we enter into chapter 12, and he talks about the hypocrisy in which is found in the lives of the Pharisees and the lawyers. And in the midst of this profound period of time, someone from the multitude interrupts Jesus as you make your way down to verse 13, "And one of the company said unto him, Master, speak to my brother that he divide the inheritance with me." A stranger from the crowd reaches out and is concerned about worldly affairs. When Jesus is spending his time in what seems to be the course of the ending of his ministry on the earth, talking about spiritual matters. We're going to come back to that thought when we get to the end. Worldly affairs that interrupt spiritual matters. Tonight we're going to look at a small section of verses in Luke chapter 12, specifically the ones that were read just a moment ago from verses 16 all the way down to verse 21. Here is the matter that's at hand: covetousness. I like to call it this way: here's the matter at hand, the world. Because that's going to be the base and the root discussion that's going to be happening. In our discussion tonight, we're going to look at this rich man that's going to be described here. And we're going to see all of the things that he has, all of the things that he could have had, and all of the things that he had forgotten. We're going to notice as we begin how this man forgets about who God is and what God has done. Then we're going to see how this man forgets the increase that he's been allowed to have. And then we're going to cover a subject in which I've entitled, "He was only a little." He was only a little. Remember, this is a man who had great wealth, who had great fame, who had obviously great power. But it only takes a little to ruin your day. And we're going to notice what that is as we go. So notice with me in Luke chapter 12, let's just read again verses 16 through 19 to get the beginnings of what we're going to look at. "And he spake a parable unto them, saying, The ground of a certain rich man brought forth plentiful. And he thought within himself, saying, What shall I do, because I have no more room to bestow my fruits? And he said, This will I do. I will pull down my barns and build greater, and there I will bestow all my fruits and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, thou hast much goods laid up for many years. Take thy ease, eat, drink, and be merry." The rich fool started right. As you notice as we begin in what we're looking at here in Luke chapter 12, verse 16, the ground of a certain rich man brought forth plentiful. In the context of what we're looking at here, it's not a problem that he was rich. It can be an issue, but as we begin, that doesn't really seem to be the issue that Jesus is pointing out to. It was not a problem that his ground brought forth good things. That was a blessing that he's going to ignore. It was not a problem that he had enough supplies, wealth, and individuals to help build these barns for him so he can store all these goods. It was not a problem of storing the goods. But we'll get to the problem in just a few moments. The problem really comes to his response to the question he asked. I love this particular account in Luke chapter 12 because it's very pertinent to us. Not on the fact that he was covetous, not on the fact that he had a lot of things, and not on the fact that it was a problem of wealth. But it's very interesting to us because we've all been in a similar situation as this. And let me explain what I mean by that. Everyone in this room has asked the question that's been found in verse 17, or went through the action found in verse 17. Read the very first few words of verse 17. And he thought within himself. You ever been in the midst of a problem and you said to yourself, maybe out loud or maybe to yourself, I talk to myself out loud. That may be an interesting or strange thing. But I would have said this out loud. Have you ever been in a problem and said, what in the world am I going to do? Or maybe you're in a situation like this. There's so much. What am I going to do with all of these things? The problem doesn't arise in all the things that he has. The problem does not arise that he has the means to take care of these things. The problem arises in his answer to his own question. And that's why that's pertinent to us. We many times say, and usually just as this passage depicts unto us, he thought within himself. Here's the problem. Here's the problem. He forgot who God was. He forgot who God was. Notice in all of the discussion from verses 16 to verse 19 how many times he refers to himself. Just go back through this with me again in verse 17 to verse 19. And he thought within himself, and we'll begin there depicting the ones, what shall I do because I have no room where to bestow my fruits? And he said, this will I do. I will pull down my barns and build greater, and there will I bestow all my fruits and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, thou hast much goods laid up for many years. Take thine ease, eat, drink, and be merry. Now, if my count's right, 11 times does he refer to himself and all of the good that he has done. He forgot who God was. The really root problem that we're looking at tonight is a man who has forgotten God. That's his response to himself. The man has forgotten what the ultimate source of all things are. Go with me to James chapter 1. James chapter 1, and I want us to notice verse 17. He forgot the ultimate source of all things that come out of this life. And I love how the writer of James says it in James 1:17. Every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, and cometh down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variableness, neither is there shadow of turning. He forgot who the source of God's things were. You know, there is nothing on this earth that we have created. We may design things. We may fashion some things that we found upon the earth and use them together to create one thing or to design one thing. But there's nothing on this earth in which we have created. Let's just take for just a moment the example of this podium or pulpit, however you want to call it. No one created this, but yet it was built. No person who is alive upon the earth created this, but yet it was built. The wood came from God's creation. Man did not create that. Man did not come up with something on his own out of nothing. Man does not create things. Now, man may have designed this, and changed it over the years. As you probably know, these bigger sections did not used to be here. It was much smaller sides. Now, you may not be able to tell it from your side, but there are new, nice, shiny screw heads right here, where a piece of this has been added to the original piece. You see, even the original design at this point has been changed. Man did not create this. Man may have built it out of what God has given him. And the same thing goes for this man in Luke chapter 12. The things that he's involved with, he did not create them. It just happened to be that the ground in which he owned brought forth fruit, and that fruit was in excess. That's what the word plentiful there means. It was in excess. It was more than he could actually do anything with. It's a large number. He forgot about God. The same thing was found in Daniel chapter 5 where King Belshazzar there. Remember, he saw the writing on the wall. Here was the problem with him. He forgot who God was, and therefore he lost all. It was a failure for him to be found there. James warned those in James chapter 4, warns us of presumptuous living before God. Because all things that we have, all things that we ever will have in verses 13 through 16 come from God. So here's the first thing we notice as we begin to talk about this man in Luke chapter 12, specifically verses 16 through 19. He forgot who God was. He forgot who God was. Now I ask us this question. Have we forgotten who God is? Have we forgotten who God is? Go with me to verse 20 and let's read that together in Luke chapter 12. But God said unto him, Thou fool, this night thy soul shall be required of thee, then whose shall those things be which thou hast provided? Here's the second thing we notice. Number one, he forgot God. Number two, he forgot increase. I don't know if you noticed it or not, but did you notice what happened in the question that God posed to this man? Which thou hast provided. It's a rhetorical question. Tonight your soul is going to be required of you because of all the things that you've provided. What had this man provided? Well, he had provided the fact that he'd forgotten who God was. Yes, he had provided the thoughts that he could tear down his barns and build greater barns. But the man in Jesus' parable had greater concerns to consider than what he was doing with his excess. In his material pursuits, he forgot the increase of the spiritual individual. And this tells the importance of the spiritual life. The man in Luke chapter 12, 16 through 21 was only concerned about the physical things of life. He was not concerned about the spiritual nature of life. He could only see and was blinded by all of the things that were coming at him right on his own property. And sometimes that's how we view life. All of these things are coming at us, whether they be good or bad, and we get blinded. And we seemingly forget to remember who God is, what He has done, and to remember what God does in His time frames. You know, the Lord promises to provide for those that are His. Go with me to Matthew chapter 7. A beautiful depiction is found in Matthew chapter 7, verse 11. The Lord promises to give good things to His children. We find this, if then being evil know how to give good gifts unto your children, and how much more shall your Father which is in heaven give good things to them that ask Him. God knows how to give. And there's a passage in which we can use and refer to in our minds, in which I've seen on various sites today. John 3:16 tells us how God knows how to give. The simple fact that we understand the waters of baptism tells us that God knows how to give, because we understand what the word heaven means. And I'm a proponent, or one who proposes, that we do not understand the grandeur and the beauties of heaven. I think we have a glimpse of them, but I don't think we fully comprehend what God has done there. Because of all of these things we can read about, we understand what God has given. God doesn't give little. God doesn't give halves. He gives everything that's needed. You know, the Lord promises to give good to His children. As you're in the book of Matthew, go to Matthew chapter 25. I want to allude to another thought that's being found here in Matthew chapter 25. And it helps us understand something about how God gives. Go all the way down to verse 26. Matthew chapter 25. We understand the beginning of this parable that happens in verse 14. For the kingdom of heaven is a man traveling to a far country who called his one servant and delivered them into his goods, or his own servants and delivered them into good. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and another 1. And we understand as we're going through this, we kind of get what's getting ready to happen. We understand the 5-talent man took the things in which he had and he doubled them. He has 10. The 2-talent individual here, he goes and he doubles them as well. But the 1-talent man, the man who was given 1, in which seems like so little, but we forget so often it was just the number that he needed. The 1-talent man, he did nothing. He did nothing. You know, the man in which we're looking at in Luke chapter 12, he was at least building barns to hold that which he was given. The 1-talent man did nothing. And I want to draw the emphasis down to verse 26. And his Lord answered and said unto him, Thou wicked and slothful servant, thou knowest that I reap where I sowed not, and gathered where I have not strawed. Wicked and slothful. That's what he's called. In the same way, the rich fool here in Luke chapter 12 had not used his goods for growth. He had not used his goods for what he could do, but he used his goods to provide and to promote who he was. Look at what I have done. Remember, 11 times he referred to himself in that conversation, my, I, thine, and soul, and self. He forgot everything he needed to know. He had forgotten that which he was going to store would eventually waste away in the particular passage, verse 18, build greater and bigger barns. This makes us wonder one question as we move from this point to our next. What do we do with that which God provides us? I'm not going to sit here and tell you if you give the Lord $1 million, He'll give you $10 million. Now, I'm not going to say if you pray to the Lord for $10,000, He'll give you that. And in the context of what we're reading here, it just so happened by this land was what was giving good produce. What do we do with that which we are given by God? I think sometimes we read accounts like this and we forget to apply it to self because we're not building bigger homes. We're not tearing our barns down and building bigger barns. We don't seem sometimes to get what's happening here. But what he was blessed with, he forgot to do with, which brings us right back to home. What do we do with that which we have? Are we helping others? Are we giving unto the Lord as we should? Or do we have the attitude as this man, oh, look what I have done. Look at my bank account. Look at my home. I sure have done a good job in this thing called life. It wasn't the substance that brought this man to his knees, but it was his attitude of more, me, my, and self. So he has forgotten increase and who it came from. So let's move down to verse 21 and see our third point, which is going to give us the beautiful emphasis of the particular chapter. Verse 21 in Luke chapter 12 says this, So is he that layeth up treasure for himself, and is not rich toward God. In connection with everything preceding verse 21, Jesus began this lesson in verse 15 with a covetous man. He began this idea with a man who was covetous. And to get the whole picture of the idea, go with me to Matthew chapter 6. Matthew chapter 6, we're going to get the whole picture of what exactly is happening here and what's the whole matter. Matthew chapter 6 all the way down to verse 19. And we begin to see the depiction. Read this very carefully with me. Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and where thieves break through and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust do corrupt, and where thieves do not break in or break through nor steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Here's the depiction of everything that's happening here. Where was his heart? This is the best way I can put it, and it's one of my favorite Southern words. His heart was in his stuff. That's what he liked. And he needed bigger and better places to put his stuff. Look at verses 23 and 24 in Matthew chapter 6. But if thy eye be evil, the whole body shall be full of darkness. If therefore the light that is in thee be darkness, how great is that darkness? No man can serve two masters, for he will either hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money or riches. In Luke chapter 12, his heart was in his stuff. His heart was in his stuff. The same thing is found in 1 Timothy. Go over there with me. 1 Timothy chapter 1, or chapter 6. 1 Timothy chapter 6. And go down to verse 6. The root of all evil here. But godliness with contentment is great gain, for we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain that we can carry nothing out. And having food and raiment, let us be therewith content. But they that be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith, and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. There's a popular song today, and I don't remember how the lyrics go exactly, but it talks about how money won't make you happy. And the first time I heard that song, I thought, this might actually be good. Then he ruined it. But money will buy a boat. What's the emphasis of that song? Put your heart in these worldly things. Put your heart in all these treasures. Now, I'm not saying that it's wrong to have a boat. But you see the importance here that's going on. When your heart's in the boat, where's your heart? When your heart's in your house, where's your heart? There's nothing wrong with having a house. When your heart's in your car, where's your heart? When your heart's in your bank account, where's your heart? In connection with everything that's being found here in this particular chapter, God says, so he that layeth up treasure for himself and is not rich for God or toward God. The question that I believe Jesus is asking is, where do you want to be rich? Where do you want to be rich? Do you want all of these worldly things? Or do you want everything that God has to offer? It wasn't a problem with this man having this number of things. It was the fact that he just loved them so much he forgot who God was. You ever wanted to have everything this world could provide? I remember being younger when I was in college, and I wanted to be rich. You've probably had that flashback of your thoughts before. But I thought that's what was important. It was another Luke chapter 12 waiting to happen. So he that layeth up treasure for himself, or so is he that layeth up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. God describes this man. I want to bring you back to verse 20 because there's a word I want us to see. Look at verse 20. But God said unto him, Thou fool. This is an interesting word. It's a word that means you without reason. It's a word that means senseless, the senseless one. It's a word that means acting rashly, the rash one. I found this to be a very applicable definition. An unbelieving one. Remember the main problem with this man? He forgot who God was and what God has done. In other words, God is saying, you have no value. Isn't it interesting that the one in which thought he had all the value of the world, he had all of the stuff that everybody else wanted. I'm going to build a bigger place for all my stuff. God says you're of no value. And he finishes it with this statement in verse 21. This will be the third or fourth time we've read this passage. So is he that layeth up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. Where's your heart? Where is your heart? Trust me, I'm asking myself the same question right now. Where's my heart? I know that everyone who is sitting in this room tonight is concerned about where their heart is. Otherwise, you would not be sitting in this room tonight. There are many places we could be. There are many places I could be, many places you could be. We could make excuses for not being here, but it goes back to the question, where's our heart? I want to conclude in John chapter 13, verse 17 tonight. John 13, verse 17. Jesus is washing the feet of the disciples in John chapter 13. In verse 12 we read, so after he washed their feet and had taken his garments and had sat down again, he said unto them, know ye what I have done for you? Ye call me Master and Lord, and you are well, for so am I. If I then, your Lord and Master, have washed your feet, ye also ought to wash another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should do as I have done unto you. Verily I say unto you, the servant is not greater than his Lord, neither is he that is sent greater than he that sent him. Now notice verse 17. If you know these things, happy are you if you do them. If you know these things, happy are you if you do them. Here's the whole point of the matter. Here's everything we're trying to get out tonight. Here's everything we're trying to emphasize. Here it is. God wants your heart. And it would be wonderful if we'd give it to Him. God wants your heart. And it would be wonderful if we were willing to give it to Him. Happy are you if you do these things. Tonight it may be the case that your heart's wrapped up in the world. You're more concerned about the world. You're more concerned about the riches. And you may realize that tonight. Tonight it could be the case that there's something in your life that's just simply not right. And you know it's not right. Because you know it's not right according to this standard. It could be the case tonight that you realize as you sit here tonight that you're not His child. That you've not done as He would have you to do to become His child in hearing His word. In putting your faith in it. In repenting of your past sins, confessing His sweet name, and being immersed in a watery grave of baptism. And admitting at that moment that you know who God is. And that you know what He has done. It may be the case that that's you tonight. It may be the case that tonight you're a child of God. And you realize one or a few or many or maybe a singular thing is between you and God. This is my favorite time on Sunday. Sunday p.m., invitation time. Because we've already been through a Bible class, a worship. We've had a good spiritual day to think about things. And we get another time to be with those in which are like-minded, and we get another opportunity to make something right. I love the invitation time. I do not consider it times as failures, but times of standing up for what's right. If there's something wrong in your life, if there's something amiss in your life, now's the time. Now's the time to make that right, whether it means becoming His child or making your life right with Him, whatever it may be. And why don't you do so as together we stand and sing.
When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea